On this video, I talk about the pain and grief of unrequited relationships that stay in the promise of a future but never materialize. And the feeling, the overwhelming feeling of bait and switch, declarations were shared and not followed through on, and this makes reality not make sense. I'm Robarge, an attachment-focused psychotherapist and a relationship educator, and I like to talk about how to heal attachment injuries and improve our relationships. And this video is going to focus on grief and loss and the crushing experience of thinking that you're going to have a relationship, get a relationship, that you are on track for something to materialize. Perhaps promises were shared, and you thought you did your due diligence, you thought you were listening intently, you thought you were taking things slowly. You thought you were asking the right questions, not only of the other person, but of yourself, to try to align with seeing things clearly. And the relationship does not happen. It doesn't take off. Now, this could be very early on. You just started dating and it fell apart. But this could also go on for a rather long time, that we stay at this place of waiting and wanting something to happen. And we have been given enough experience, enough information, enough affection to imply that this is something that we're both, the other person, you, the other person, are investing in. And you find out that it's not happening. Either perhaps there's a very abrupt ending, or perhaps it just stays stuck at this place of non-fruition. It's like waiting for a meal that never comes. However, you initially entered the restaurant. You did order some entrees or some appetizers early on, and there was a declaration of, yes, we want to sit down and nourish this relationship. Yes, I want to break bread. Yes, I want to share with you and create an experience of vulnerability and intimacy. Unrequited love also speaks to unrequited relationship, speaks to an unrequited investment, an unequal investment, promises to show up, and then there's no showing up. And the future that you thought that you were creating, that also is unrequited. So the grief and this crushing loss is oftentimes, in my opinion, in my experience, in working with clients, and also in my own life, that something that exists in potential that doesn't materialize because it exists in infinite potential of the promise of what's to come. And so it's not actually here, it hasn't materialized, it's all a projection into the future, it's a projection on our life, where it might be going, it's a projection onto the other person. And this infinite promise of getting the love that you want, a feeling of starting a new chapter that would bring some closeness and happiness and exploration of what it means to enjoy each other, to be in a relationship. And when that doesn't happen, that infinite possibility can link to an infinite grief. This is crushing. It's complete non-materializing, complete non-getting what you want. When this happens, it is a crushing blow. Our own insecurities, our neurosis, our wounds projected onto each other, the other person leading from their wounds, ultimately not able to address them, but playing out a scenario of anticipating the possibility of something different, even though They have no skill. Perhaps we're in that role as well. We have no skill. And there's something really, really attractive and exciting and inviting about, you mean we can move outside of our own everyday suffering? We can move outside of the way that we continually see the world through the lens of our own wounding. And the challenge here, and this is going to be really hard to hear and talk about it, because we like to think that we don't do this. It's also a bit conceptual, so this might be new information for you. We love our wound. Our wound is our identity. We can insert the word our dysfunction, our unhealthy behaviors, our mental illness, our diagnosis, our adaptive strategies, our attachment distress, our behaviors of pushing people away and being guarded, our behaviors of shielding ourselves from seeing reality clearly because it's too painful, the denial in which we live. And we bring all of this to the dinner table when we're meeting for the first time on a date with someone else. And they bring all of theirs to the dinner table for the first time meeting. And there's just a lot of obscuring, a lot of not really being able to see each other. And in fact, there is a commitment and allegiance to, I will continue to support and love and uphold my mental illness, my attachment wounds, the worry, the distress, the neurotic fear, my addictions, the way that I am seeing the world in order to function because life is too hard and scary and there's so much suffering. And I myself am guarded to work through, to feel that pain. So therefore, what we do is we pretend it's not there. We don't mention it because we're not even fully conscious of it ourselves. This brings me to the point which oftentimes conversations like this, videos like this, there's this whole group of people who are all about demonizing other people for being dishonest and ill-intentioned and really trying to pull one over on you, and how they're completely presenting one thing. And in fact, there's this power play, a power over, and this exists. This is true. But unfortunately, there's a lot of these videos because they get clicks and likes, and they're very salacious, and it's all about the other person is nasty. And let's really judge them and blame them. And maybe that is a good chapter, maybe accessing some rage, maybe understanding this aggression that's stirring inside of you, aggression that was directed towards you as well. And now we have aggression on top of aggression. And it's always about them, other. Look at how they have failed. Look at how they have lied. Look at how they are dishonest. Again, I'm not downplaying that this exists. However, it's a particular way of seeing others, seeing a relationship, seeing ourselves in that process. And we need to make them bad so that we can be good. We need to make them bad so that they hold the shame that we cannot feel, that we've inherited from our own attachment wounds. Again, this might be a necessary developmental process, an experience in your own maturing, in your own healing. However, these type of genre of videos and those who really like to talk about all of the shortcomings and the dishonesty and the personality defects, the personality disorders of them, really fails to see how we ourselves bring this to a relationship. Even though we say, but I didn't know, and they said this, and they said this, and they said they wanted this, and I was going slowly, I did ask right questions, I was being cautious. And yet here we are again, you don't get the relationship that you want, and you're so crushed by an incredible amount of grief. A part of our brain, a survival instincts kick in, and those survival instincts link to an emergency and an urgency of needing relational connection. And when this instinct kicks in, it is a survival instinct. It is not rational. It is not logical. It's not the cognitive part of the brain that is using executive functioning to make sense of all of the pieces of information and objectively conclude, well, this isn't the right situation for you. This isn't the right situation for me, etc. And what happens is that our own wound, our attachment injury from the past, this unsatisfied, this longing, this great need to find connection, to be loved, to be known, it didn't happen again. And this activates this incredible, very painful feeling of, but why? But why? Why? Why can't it work out? Why can't we be together? Why don't you have more skill than that you said that you had? And I often laugh. I laugh my history. I remember talking with a friend about it many years ago. and in the context of this conversation, she was talking about a recent relationship of hers. And she said, why can't he just be a different person? And we laughed so much. And there's this inability to let in that it's over. It's an inability to let in there was a lot of promise. And it doesn't mean that the promise was dishonest. It doesn't mean that the other person was dishonest. It means that they believed themselves that they could sustain connecting. And perhaps you know this as well, that many of us are so mired in our own wounds. We are so mired in our own defensiveness. We are mired in our own anxiety. We are mired in our addictions, our workaholism, our love addiction, our gambling, our substance addiction, process addictions, ways that we're just constantly trying to numb out, shut down, find entertainment. And we use relationships also for this big, great promise, like it's a lottery. And we tell ourselves, I think I won the lottery. I met someone and we went out together and they said this and I said this and I really think that there's something here. And there's no skill. There's really no skill to sustain or make the promise materialize. And for many of us, we fall in love with the promise. We realize the only thing that has been offered is the promise. And maybe also very quickly, abruptly, the other person just pulls away, just shuts down. Maybe that's your style too. Ghosting, disappearing, just completely realizing, nope, not gonna invest in that. Because we are habitually ingrained, we're habitually committed to repeating the same patterns, even if they're based on dysfunction, even if they're based on attachment trauma, even if they're based on mental illness. That's where our allegiance lies. We're in relationship with those patterns. We're in relationship with that dysfunction. We are in relationship with our anxiety, and we don't have time to let in someone else. We don't have time to do something different. We don't have time to see a person in front of us and show up in the present moment because we are completely lost in habitual looping and telling ourselves the story, seeing the world through the lens of our own cracked sense of self. That's a really, really hard phrase to hear. And the reason why I share it is that the wound is a very self-absorbed wound. And the wound of the development of the self and how we're not maturing in relationship and we're not able to move beyond younger feeling states. And that for many of us, it's this wound that we cannot sustain being connected to other because we're more self-absorbed. We exist we operate, we orient to the world, to ourselves, to others, through the lens, through the wound, through our self-absorption. And many of us very quickly realize, well, I can't have a relationship there. There's no room. I'm in love with the wound. I'm in love with the attachment trauma. I'm in love with the dysfunction. And many of us in this place say, no, that's not true. That's not true. Of course I want a relationship. Of course I was really trying. And they're not pitted against each other. The same way that the wound is not pitted against the other person. But that's what happens. We enter a relationship or attempt to enter a relationship, and we find that now we're entertaining the other person's dysfunction. We're trying to maneuver, accommodate, respond, figure out what are their hang-ups, what are their obstacles and limitations to vulnerability and openness. How are they sharing mixed messages that are incongruent with the words and the actions? And yet still trying to figure out a way to crack the code to make that possible, to make that accommodating, to continue to stay connected, but now we're connected through the dysfunction, through the mental illness, through the wound. And sometimes, some of us, that's the only thing that we know. The challenge is that this is all based on previous hurt and suffering. It's not fresh. It's not alive. It's not new. It exists in this place of deep hurt. And it shows up as shame and worthlessness. And it shows up as loneliness. It illuminates how we exploit our loneliness to try to get relationship, to outrun this feeling of loneliness. And as a result, when it doesn't materialize, the relationship's not here, it activates an abandonment wound, which feels like complete existential starvation. Existential as in existence. Your whole being, your existence is being denied nourishment and being denied food. And when we enter that place of the unrequited, the promise existing in infinite potential, and then simultaneously it activates infinite grief, infinite loss of everything that will not happen in what you had hoped would happen. That existential starvation is at its strongest. It is incredibly painful. You might also get very, very confused at what was shared and offered, that the other person appeared to say that they do want a kind of relationship of building connection, of a future. And in retrospect, there's this term, this idea called love bombing. And I want to make the same point that I made earlier, that it's not about singling them out, that they did anything of nefarious, ill intent, and they're out to manipulate you. It's this whole genre of thinking about how everyone's out to get us. And again, I have to be really, really careful here, because I'm not denying that exists. And many of us need to address that as part of our history or part of our current, present relationships. But there's a much bigger, expansive way to view this, in that this is universal and been going on since day one. Of human beings are frightened of vulnerability, and want to live life to constantly try to stay guarded and disconnected, and creating an offering to our own dysfunction, creating an offering to the wound, creating an offering to our anxiety, creating an offering to the beliefs where we don't deserve love, we are denied love, therefore I will deny you love too. And it's not necessarily conscious. It's not done out of ill will. It's not to be evil and purposefully mess with your head. I think this is the fourth time that I'm saying it. Yes, that does exist. There are scenarios and situations where people are messing with your head. That's not what this video is about. This video is about what I might call the vacation relationship promise. I might call the idealized relationship promise, or we could call it the escape from life relationship promise. The vacation relationship promise means someone showing up early on and treating this new interaction almost like they're removed from their everyday life, as if they're on vacation. And this is going to be different. And like most people who go on vacation, there's a putting regular life on hold. And there's a commitment to saying, I want adventure. I want an experience. I want something new. A holiday. And so some people, perhaps you, perhaps me at times, have entered meeting someone new, have entered starting to date and negotiate relationship as if we have just gone on vacation. And in that context, the other person that you're with, they just appear to have so much skill. They appear to be available. They appear to want to connect with you. And that's because they're on vacation. In their life, they might not know this, but this is common. This is very common. And in a very short period of time, after a week, after 2 months, after a month, after 2 months, whatever the duration of time, like all vacations that end, we return to our everyday life. We return to our own suffering. We return to our relationship to our suffering and how suffering is designed to keep us away from relationship that is full of goodness and love. Suffering is designed to keep us shut down in ignorance, in denial. Suffering is designed to disconnect us from our own resource. And if the other person attempted to have this wonderful experience of a vacation relationship promise, the word promise is the anticipation that this will continue, and it doesn't. There's also the same idea, but the idealized relationship promise, in that we don't have these skills. The kind of relationship we're talking about has not materialized in our life. We really don't know how to sustain that. We ourselves are guarded, fearful of vulnerability, have our own ways of dodging and pushing away vulnerability and intimacy. But we might begin interacting with a new potential partner. We might come into a new dating experience, and we attempt to live in this place of an idealized view. And we show up with our idealized self. And we see the other person's idealized self. And we create a promise out of this. That what you're seeing, this idealized self, is what I'm offering. What I'm seeing in you, your idealized self, is what you're offering me. And we believe that that is the reality, that is the norm, that is the constant. And it's not, because it's not grounded in reality. It's the idealized version. And that promise, when it comes crashing down, when you're denied that promise, and there's this great confusion of, well, who is this person? Who is this person? I really thought that they were presenting themselves truthfully. And I believe there is a truth to it, because our idealized self can also be truthful. We don't generally live there or sustain relationship there. And the relationship We don't have a foundation of friendship in order to reveal ourselves to each other in a very slow way. There's a lot of assumptions and jumping to conclusions and creating expectations. As much as, I've heard, perhaps you, many times people say, I don't have expectations. I just go into it. I just don't know how that's possible. The brain creates associations. The brain is constantly gathering data and saying, this is attractive, this is not attractive, this means this does not mean that. Oh, I think when I connect those two pieces of information, well, that's giving me the green light to say, yes, we're on track to be in relationship. Something that we don't do enough is to realize we're using certain words, but we're not using the same words. Words mean something different to each person in the context. It's very disorienting and painful to think that how you interpreted what was shared is actually not an interpretation that you both share. What becomes so painful is this incredible disconnect, how incredibly far apart you actually are, where for a brief period of time, maybe a somewhat longer period of time, you really thought there was this shared experience, that you're on the same page. And then you realize that you're not. Sometimes when we're pitted against the other person's wound, what this means is that their anxiety disorder takes precedence. That's more important than you and more important than the relationship. Another example, sometimes when we are pitted against the wound, either we're doing it to the other person or they're doing it to us. It might mean that they have a greater allegiance and they are in love with their irrational fears, that they're in love with their view of the world. That is a worldview that limits connection and emotional closeness. And they are not going to give that up. That's their first relationship. That's their first love. Sometimes we are pitted against each other in our abandonment wound. And all we see is abandonment is inevitable. Abandonment will happen. We have a victim mentality that all relationships only end in abandonment. And we're constantly coming from a place of an insecurity to try to prove that the other person is going to abandon us, to the point where we don't really see what the other person's offering. We're constantly monitoring what they won't offer and what will eventually go away. Some of us also, in the same ideas that I'm just sharing here, that we pit the other person, or they pit us against their wound of a rejection projection. That it's inevitable, that they really believe they're going to be rejected, and so therefore they reject you first. This is unconscious. This isn't something that many people go into saying, haha, I can't wait to reject the other person. But when you are crushed, when you can't stand the weight of vulnerability, the weight of intimacy, the weight of asking you to show up and to reveal yourself and put down your guardedness and to truly experiment with being available, what we bump into is the belief of the wound that we're not going to be loved here. This is a place of rejection. And historically, the attachment wound is linked to not getting your needs met. And we have such a great allegiance to upholding and remembering the fear and the pain, to the point we've internalized it, is that's how we orient to the world, to ourselves, and we're orienting to the other person. We're orienting to the relationship. That relationship is rejection. Relationship is abandonment. Relationship is upholding irrational fears. Relationship is about anxiety. It might also be about neurotic, habitual worry. And that's a wonderful way that we can buffer ourselves from actually being available. We don't have to take the risk of being available if we're consumed in our own worry. Sometimes, because of our history and our attachment wounds, our allegiance, our definition, our understanding of love and relationship is that love actually is guardedness. Love is shutting others out. Love is being shut out and shutting you out. Love is about abrupt exits. Just totally ghost each other. Just totally cut ties. Pretend you've not shared any intimacy. Again, that abandonment. Love is abandonment. Love is to behave carelessly, so carelessly that you hurt another, that you burn the other, that you're so unaware of just how much you're crushing another person's spirit by playing with the promise of being together. Or it's also, love is, I need to make you the enemy. Love is, you are other. Love is, you're on the other side. Love is, you're failing me. You are a failure. And I'm going to try really hard to stay in relationship with you while I keep telling you how inadequate you are. Love is power over. Love is disempowerment. Love is power dynamics. Love is, in order for me to feel power, I need to not engage you and not offer you connection. And by doing that, I'm just taking all the power, and I will make the decisions when we connect. Or if it's the other person, if it's you, you will make all the decisions when we connect. So love is withholding. I'm not going to give you what I promised. I'm not going to allow myself to get it. I'm not going to allow myself to receive it. Love is making sure no one is loved. Love is about denying love. Love is about denying what we're doing. That's the gaslighting experience. What do you mean I said I wanted to be in a relationship? I don't think you heard that correctly. What do you mean I said I was available? Well, I said I was available, but you misunderstood, the context in which I was sharing that. What do you mean I implied that we wanted a future together? I think that you're acting really clingy and needy. So love is confusion. Love is really messing with reality and creating an incongruence. And love is making sure there's not a shared reality of our behaviors, of our commitment, of what was shared, of our history. And very quickly, love is rewriting history. This is incredibly crazy-making. This is incredibly confusing. Love is hurting those that we love. Love is about hiding and guardedness. Love is about prioritizing other things over the relationship. Work. Work is so much more important than you. Having my free time and independence is so much important than communicating when we're going to get together. And what I've already talked about, our own dysfunction, our mental illness, our wounds are so much more important than the other person. I can't get together because I'm investing and feeding and fueling my own neurotic fear. And I'm building up and fortifying the guardedness and the wall that I live with. And if you want to be in a relationship with me, I'm going to keep strengthening this wall, denying connection, withholding connection. And we're going to see just how much you can be in a relationship with me by not getting your attachment needs met. Because that's love. That's what we have done. That's what I've learned. That's what you've learned. That's what I call inverted relating. When I'm working with clients, it's very inverted relating. I talk about it's like upside down. And it's about absence. It's not about presence. It's all based upon let's really give the other person a hard time in such a way that they don't get what they want. They don't get their needs met. They don't get connection. However, we will stay hooked in that place. And that's how we will define the relationship. That's the origin of the attachment wound. Maybe not yours, maybe not everyone's, but a lot of us. It's this denying presence, denying emotional responsiveness, denying curiosity, not asking questions about who are you, but making assumptions about who are you. And very quickly after this promise has been agreed upon, this relationship promise, very quickly not engaging the other person, not showing curiosity. Because love is about ignoring each other. And the more I ignore you, then the more I love you. It's so sad. It's so twisted. It's so based on dysfunction. It's not that they do this to us. They have these problems. We have these problems. We either do it to ourselves, we do it to other people, we do it in different contexts, we do it with family. And most of us are just completely in denial, clueless, unaware that this in fact is how we protect ourselves. We uphold these behaviors, this dysfunction, to protect ourselves from being hurt again. There's this whole series of internal beliefs, internal contracts, internal agreements based on how we've been hurt in the past. And all of these internal contracts and agreements are designed to protect us from ever getting hurt again. And if you really look at the contract and you turn to page 47 and you turn to section 5A-B7, and you really read the fine print, it says when you bring your attachment injuries and your dysfunction and your mental illness to the point where it's not even mental illness anymore, it's just the way we operate in this world, because many of us are hurting and hurt. And in this particular section of the contract, it says, you're really not going to get relationship. What you're going to get is more guardedness. What you're going to get is more promise. What you're going to get is more disappointment. What you're going to get is more suffering. And when this shows up again and it slaps us in the face, it is so painful. There's a film that I like. There's this image in this film, and it's the film 500 Days of Summer. And this relationship ends. And this main character, he realizes his hope to rekindle a relationship that ended, and he thought maybe they'd get back together. And he sees reality. He has this idea of what he's projecting, what he hopes it is, the promise. And they actually do in the film, they split the screen and you get to see his expectation. And you get to see reality. You get to see what he was hoping for, of the reuniting with her, reuniting with after the disconnect. And that maybe they can start fresh and have a new chapter. But then you see on the other side of the screen, you see the reality of her not interested in his bids for connection. In fact, she has moved on and is in a different relationship. So when he realizes this, and his sadness and grief takes over, he runs out of the apartment. It happens to be a party. There's other people, and he just leaves, and he's walking down the street, and it's nighttime. And the way that they show it in the film is he's walking away. He is burdened and crushed by grief. And they turn the film no longer into the film of seeing him. He becomes a graphic. It turns into a line drawing. It turns into two-dimensional. It turns into an illustration. And you get to see an eraser come in, and that grief, that crushing grief, that pain is just erasing him. Which is what happens when we lose the promise. We are so linked. Our core identity is to this place that before I die, before you die, before anybody dies, we're going to be loved. And we're going to have this relationship that feels like a feast, that feels like presence, not absence, not accommodating other people's dysfunction, not constantly maneuvering guardedness and withholding, but in fact openness. And when we don't get it, that very human, real, deep identity. It's linked to our identity. I need to be loved. I need to be in a relationship. I need an experience of a relationship where we nurture and experience love in our life. And many of us don't get this. Many of us, it doesn't happen. And if you're getting up there in years and age, I'm somewhat at that, in that space as well. And you really look back on a whole life, even an adult life, of the shrapnel, of the damage. And that you can track and link a life of disappointing connection, a life of disappointment, a life of not having the kind of relationship that something in your spirit, in your core, in your heart knows is possible. And there's oftentimes this feeling of this great cosmic joke of like, why? Why are you being denied this? It shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be that I'm repeatedly denied this. And my answer to that, which is not satisfying, is that there is this neutral aspect to suffering that's ununique to you, and that there's suffering. Look around, there's suffering everywhere, and this just happens to be your flavor of suffering. And go out in the world and interview 5 people, and maybe some of them have the same flavor of suffering, but they're going to have their own intense suffering. That's also completely based on an incredible confusion of how life is just not making sense, of why am I being given this particular allotment of suffering. At some point then it just becomes impersonal. To continue this idea of if we get overly focused on them, they have failed us, they are hurting us, they're really trying to mess with us. Oftentimes that dynamic becomes about aggression. And if we drop down into aggression, there's a lot of rage here. There's such thing called primal panic, when your attachment needs are not getting met. But now we could also talk about primal rage. The rage experienced by a child whose parent doesn't know them. The rage of someone who's dedicated their life to a partner and a relationship where that partner exits and walks away. The rage of offering so much goodness, your resources, your skills, your creativity, your personality, with its linked to everything beautiful, and still the person does not want to be in relationship with you. And there's a rage that shows up, a rejection of core identity. The challenge here is that we start to see the world as us against them or them against us, and it really becomes about directing negativity at those who are hurting us. And so this is a worldview that doesn't have compassion. And sometimes when we're hurt or the other person's hurt, it's all about perpetuating the hurt. Let's keep it going. back to what I said earlier, the way I will show you that I love you is to continually hurt you. The more I hurt you, then it shows you just how much I cared. These are the messages that we live with, that we don't sit down with. When we go to dinner for the first time, for the third time, into the third month, meeting someone new, it's very rare that we have the awareness to say, I just want to let you know that I'm guarded. I want to let you know that when I'm afraid of vulnerability, I'm going to shut you out. And I'm going to substitute interacting with you by being incredibly busy, almost like I'm a workaholic. And I'm going to just talk about how I'm so stressed out that I couldn't possibly have any more time for you. And I use this as a behavior to distance myself from feeling the goodness and the closeness of the connection that we've already created. Because I'm going to keep myself from love. I'm going to keep myself from having this move beyond the wound, move beyond the dysfunction, move beyond the anxiety disorder, move beyond the mental illness, which is not even mental illness anymore because it's so common and everyday and we do it all the time. We don't even call it mental illness. But we don't say that. The other person doesn't say that. Instead, we share the idealized promise. We enter a period of behaving like we're on vacation. Not ourselves, not really who we are in relationship. Really, ultimately believing whether or not we're conscious of it or not, this isn't going anywhere. You gotta be kidding me. You think I'm going to offer myself? You think I'm going to be vulnerable? You think I'm going to look at the 40 years of dysfunction and guardedness and woundedness and attachment trauma that is cycling through my nervous system, and whenever vulnerability and intimacy is present, you really think that I'm going to work with that I'm going to be honest about that? No, I'm going to be frightened. And I'm going to enter autopilot. I'm going to enter the trauma trance. And I'm going to be reactionary and fearful. And I will push you away. I will shut you down. I will shut this down. I will drop you so quick. I will abruptly end. This is what we do. It's very painful also. Perhaps sometimes it's more identified that there is a person, the one who initiated this or is doing this, but at the same time, there's also this really deep hurt and longing of just knowing they also are not going to get their attachment needs met. And many times, the hurt that we're doing to others is unrealized hurt from our past that we've yet to address. It's very painful. We get lost in this paradigm. We get lost in this paradigm of denying relationship to each other. There's an experience of grieving if we're practicing trying to be honest with this depth of crushing grief and crushing suffering. What I also said, that the infinite grief that shows up because the promise existed in infinite possibility, so therefore the grief exists in infinite loss. That's nothing we will ever reconcile, and it's not personal. We pop out of that realm. We realize that that depth of suffering is not ours to take on, and it's not personal. As a human being, we didn't win the lottery. We didn't get. We weren't chosen. We weren't able to find the Savior who will release us from this suffering. Where we're still trying to use the relationship to heal the previous wounds. That's the setup. On paper, theoretically, as a potential approach or intervention to healing, that might make some sense to say, well, two people need to practice revealing their wounds to each other. And then they practice staying conscious to create stronger boundaries so they're not pitting the wound against each other. And there's a great sensitivity and caring and compassion for how each other is hurt and guarded and unable to sustain relationship. And theoretically, maybe, just maybe, I'm sure there's some examples, some people somehow manage to make that work. And for most of us, it doesn't work like that. That the moment that we try to bring the wound into the relationship or the way in which we're interacting and relating, the foundation of communication, the foundation of intimacy and vulnerability is channeled through the wound and needing to uphold, value, accommodate, adjust to each other's wound, well, then we're still operating in the hurt of dysfunction. Keep in mind when you start connecting with someone and you notice this inspiration of the promise. Keep in mind, for many of us, what we're talking about is not what we're talking about. This shows up a lot in therapy, that what the client is sharing, the story they're sharing is not the story that they're sharing. There's a story underneath it. There's a desire underneath it. There's something masked underneath it. There's the unsaid underneath it. And so when someone says, yes, I want relationship, I want the promise, I'm going to offer the promise, and I'm going to, for a sustained, limited amount of time, go through the behaviors as if I'm available, even though I am frightened of being available. And historically in my life, I spend more effort and energy shoring up my defenses and keeping myself hidden from others. But I'm going to do it, the opposite of that, with you for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'm gonna try to convince myself that I can do this, and that this, in fact, is the way that I operate, that this is the way that I orient to love, to relationship, to letting another person in. What happens is that what they're talking about is not what they're talking about. There's so much that goes unsaid. And we can't blame ourselves. We can't say, why didn't I see this? Why didn't I hear it? Maybe, sometimes we are blind ourselves. Sometimes we rationalize. Sometimes we hear what we want to hear. But also sometimes we are neutral. And we have no reason to be suspicious of the other person's intentions. But we rush relationship, we connect too soon, we're too eager to believe. And then this perpetuates our suffering when it ends and doesn't work out. But they said this, but they did this, but they said, but I thought that they meant, and then we have all these mixed messages. It's like we're doing mixed message math, trying to make sense of how do you balance the equation. I really thought of the information, of the different messaging, and at some point it did mean this, but then it changed, now it means this, and I'm totally confused. Many of us enter the promise of a new relationship with a great risk, and in some ways that's the nature of relationship, but the risk is that we practice a deeper emotional connection and revealing ourselves when in fact we have no foundation for friendship. And I love the word stranger. We are strangers. We are strangers to each other. But yet we are going through the motions and beginning to practice being intimate and being vulnerable and believing that we have a close connection. And this creates a lot of confusion because there's an incongruence. There's still a part of you, there's a part of me, there's a part of our attachment awareness that says, I have no basis to trust this person. They're a stranger. We're not friends. They appear warm. They appear like we can laugh. They appear that they are being generous to invite me in. But nonetheless, we're not friends. And many of us just do not know how to hold back and to not jump into romantic relating and interaction. And this is very, very, very dangerous for many of us who have these attachment wounds that are unresolved. Because what we know with trauma reenactment, what we know with the repetition compulsion, it's very easy to go mindless in this place. Remember, I talked about absence and being ignored and not knowing each other. Well, we're already simulating that by not having any foundation of friendship. We're moving forward, attempting to be intimate when we have no basis for being intimate outside of the promise and this great, great longing to find connection in this world, this existential drive to find love and to be loved and to offer love. Keep in mind, relating and relationship happens between interactions, between dating. And what does this mean? The seeds we plant, the consistency, the showing up, the reaching for each other, pursuing each other, a consistency of wanting to be in each other's lives. And what we're going to notice when we start moving into this place of a promise unrealized, and move into this place of not sustaining a connection like we thought that there's going to be, and we move into this place where in fact we're really signing up and the other person is offering, and maybe we're offering ourselves to say, let's play out our dysfunction and our mental illness. Let's play out pushing each other away again. Dating and relationship happens between the meetings. We see consistent forms of staying engaged. We see consistent forms of being curious for each other. Ways to create a callback of when we related the last time or the last week, and able to integrate and fold into what happened before, and that we're constantly creating this shared reality. Because very quickly, when this isn't going anywhere, we're going to get very, very confused, and there's not a shared reality. And it feels like mixed messages. It feels like loss. It feels like fighting for something that we can't win. And then very quickly, it feels like this history of attachment trauma. Keep in mind, compatibility is not about personality traits. Compatibility is not about values. Compatibility is not about your likes and dislikes. Now, we can do that as an exercise, and sometimes we glean some information from that and say, okay, well, that's interesting, that's helpful. But really, compatibility is about the degrees in which we want to connect and reconnect, the frequency, the ways in which we open ourselves up to each other. And this is not something you have to negotiate and talk about and explain and teach and create a PowerPoint presentation and write an 8-page letter and really try to explain like how to be emotionally present and available. When you find yourself doing that, you are overly committed to hanging on to the promise that's not going to materialize. We don't have to explain to others how they need to join us as if we're their teacher. We must find someone who's already doing it. And that it is not our job to become a project manager, or in some cases, a case manager for the other person, to coach them in how they're supposed to show up, to coach them how they're failing the relationship, to coach them on how to be less guarded. That is a setup. That's more accommodating the wound and still not looking at the fact you're not going to get what you want. You're already not getting it. The last thing that we need here, as painful and as horrible as this is going to sound, we need to learn to end. We need to learn to have the skill as adults to walk away. And that's not going to be easy because we are going to be regressed. We are going to be connected to this dead-end place of the attachment wound of rejection and abandonment where we lose resource and we're not operating in our higher functioning. But instead, we're just stuck saying, love me, love me, love me. Like, maybe if I reach out again, maybe if we meet up again, maybe if why don't we go on it's just always this possible, is it possible to somehow get back to a minimal level, just the entry point of the way it was 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago or whenever it had that promise. We need to disidentify with the promise as hurting us in a very personal way and say that this is universal. Humans, our ancestors, generation after generation, people have wanted to be loved and love each other, and they've not been able to. And this experience of the great promise that denies you connection at some point becomes universal and is not about your personal wounding. It's about the reality of suffering. And that we can take a step back and say, actually, relationships are rather suspicious. And relationships are not all they're cracked up to be. And especially how our culture, depending on what culture you're in, how many cultures venerate a relationship as being transcendent achievement, as if it's a prize. And you will have worth, and you will arrive, and finally feel a depth of belonging and happiness that you've never felt before. That's not unique to you wanting it, and it's not unique to you not getting it. And this is the place, that realization, that crushing grief, that crushing truth is the place where, well, maybe I just want to give up. Really give up. It's this incredible feeling of like, well, what is possible then? The answer to that is more relationship beyond the romantic, beyond the personal partner relationship. And that take a look around, the whole world is a buffet of relating. And if we only think that we're going to find this one kind of relationship, and it might not be you, everybody has their own challenge. Maybe this is your challenge, and maybe you won't get this great romantic partnership that you're so invested in and that you easily get drunk on at its promise and possibility. And then through being drunk, you don't pay attention and you find yourself crushed at yet again that which you thought was right in front of you. It's here, it's here, it's here, it's almost here. And then it just disappears. The apparition. The ghost of the relationship. And you're left again with absence. This deep connection, the non-relating in your life, the non-intimacy in your life, the non-vulnerability, the non-engagement, the non-emotional responsiveness. And what we can do, the only thing that we can do is say, I must go out in the world and find some connection in other context, other capacity, in other situations, with other types of people, and with nature, and with animals, and with passion, and with purpose, and with life itself. To go stand at the edge of the ocean and say, well, I don't have the kind of relationship that I keep longing for, but I'm going to kick my shoes off and go for a walk on the beach and enjoy the ocean because I'm alive. And many of you hearing this, many of us hearing that, just shrug our shoulder and go, well, how sentimental, how ridiculous. That's not a solution. That's not attractive. And even after watching this video, many of us are going to come back to the temper tantrum, the great temper tantrum, but I want it, but I want it, but I want it. And when the great promise ends and this potential relationship dies, We keep contacting the other person. We keep forcing and pushing and sending text messages and calling, saying, but, don't you see me? But, don't you know that I am being so authentic and transparent and offering connection, a goodness, a purity? Why don't you want my purity? And the answer we have is they don't, because they want their dysfunction, they want their wound. They don't have the capacity and skill to pop out and see other options beyond the anxiety, beyond the attachment wound. So great empathy, great compassion to you, to me, all of us. This isn't something that we just resolve after watching one video. It's not something that just goes away. It's not something that I say, here's the 5 snappy steps that you follow these 5 steps. This is about dropping down into your own suffering and showing up. That's how it's not about the work, doing the work. There's no work. It's about presence. It's the opposite of absence. And being able, as hard as it is, to sit with your own suffering and say, nope, I didn't get it again. And I'm not going to be crushed here. I'm not going to die here. It feels like death. I like to fight against it. I'm going to have a few temper tantrums. But this is not the only reality that I'm living with. And I myself am learning how to pop out of my mental illness, my attachment wound, my dysfunction, my anxiety, my worry, my addiction, etc., etc. This isn't something we do in 6 months. This is a commitment, a lifelong practice. And many of us, it takes us by surprise, and like a train, like a truck, like being run over by a semi-truck, we didn't see it coming. And we tried so hard to warn ourselves. But it happened again. And each time it happens, that's another opportunity for more compassion. And the challenge is to have compassion for the other person. The other person who screwed you over, the other person who's dishonest, the other person who is so guarded and hiding, the person who ghosted you, the person who abruptly dropped you, the person who said and sent so many mixed messages that you now have no idea what exactly was true and not, and what is reality. And to be able to say they are hurting in their life, they too are completely lost in the wound. They're not letting in love, even though for a brief period of time they say that they want to. They don't have the skill. And it took us to be crushed by being denied it again to get to see and have it illuminated. No, they can't offer this. And maybe also they are a reflection and a mirror of who we are, and in fact we can't offer it either. Seeing our own guardedness, seeing our own limitation, seeing how we are already in relationship with our dysfunction, and there is no way we're giving that up. There's no way we're giving up our shame. There's no way we're giving up our being judgmental. There's no way giving up demanding someone accommodate our wound. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry to all of us that this is what we deal with. This is relationship. This is attachment trauma. This video is a part of a series and really exploring attachment trauma and attachment wounds, specifically around grief. And today's video is the unrequited, and how that promise is so crushing. So pay attention or stay tuned. More videos if you like this content. More videos are on the way. Now do the things, and you know what I'm talking about. That means click like, hit subscribe, and also leave a comment. If you get value from my effort, from my experience, from my passion, from wanting to care, and so that we can all grow, pass this along. Please share it with others. It does take a lot of work and energy and effort to build up to the process of being able to share this. And please receive it as an offering, and there is some generosity. So if you could pay it forward and share it with others, that's very, very helpful to promote the video itself and to support me. Thank you so much. More videos coming soon. See you next time.